This is the Planeteers Podcast. Stories of women who are doing the work, restoring what's broken, protecting what still holds, and showing us that change is still possible. I'm Beth Bannerman. Each week, I talk with scientists, leaders, and doers, women who are shaping the future with courage, creativity, and grit. The damage is real, so is their courage to heal it. Hello, and welcome to the Planeteers Podcast. With me is a very special guest, Abby Reyes. Welcome, Abby.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Abby is a writer, systems thinker, and longtime advocate for climate justice, human and environmental rights, and community-led change. As Director of Community Resilience at UC Irvine, Abby leads cross-sector teams focused on building equity-centered climate solutions. Her work brings together scholars, organizers, and public institutions to support frontline communities in shaping just transitions rooted in community power. Abby's book, Truth Demands, traces the personal and political aftermath of the 1999 murders of 3 land rights advocates, her partner among them, on indigenous Uwa territory in Colombia. It's a story about grief, resistance, and what it takes to keep showing up for justice when the answers aren't clear. Abby's career has bridged legal practice, policy advocacy, and higher education. She's worked in rural legal assistance in the Philippines, walked alongside indigenous movements in Latin America, clerked on the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, and co-chaired the board of Earth Rights International. She holds degrees from Stanford and UC Berkeley Law and is a proud advisor to the National Association of Climate Resilience Planners. Abby believes that the solutions we need for climate and democracy already live in community, and that part of our job is to build the human infrastructure to help those solutions thrive. Oh my goodness, I cannot wait to talk to you, Abby.
I'm really glad to be here too. Thank you for making this opportunity.
My pleasure. Okay, I just got done reading Truth Demands, and wow. As I said to you in a text prior to this, I felt like I've been hanging out with you all week.
You have been.
It's just been such a great friend. What a story. So for me, this story, well, let me say this. On the cover of your book, which is going to be released next week, is that correct?
On May 6th.
It's going to be, okay. So the book is available on May 6th. And on the cover of the book, Nicholas Thompson, CEO of The Atlantic, called your book astonishing and brilliantly told. I couldn't agree more. And as I read it, I was taken in immediately because it was part crime story, part memoir, and part spiritual guidance or an empowerment manifesto that I can use, others can use. And it's a perfect book for people who are feeling as if they are in the rough and tumble of some type of conflict or changed to navigate when things are unclear. And so what a generous offering your book is. Thank you so very much for sharing that with us.
Thank you for reading. I can't wait to share this story in this way with others. I'm really honored that you read and that you saw the offering.
Yeah, you should. So thank you for sending me the digital advance copy. I'd like to go back, though, even before the story that you've beautifully articulated in the book itself. And I'd like to ask you, what inspired you to follow the path of environmental justice or climate justice? Was there a moment that you can trace it back to?
Well, there are 2 moments. Thank you for this question because it has me thinking all the way back. I will say, even as a young, high school student in the Washington, D.C. area, this was in the 80s, we did what it took to figure out white paper recycling. So before that point, there hadn't been any, even just paper recycling in the public schools in the Delmarva region. And we figured that out locally and we figured it out regionally. And in that process, our waste management company was using high school students to go door to door. We were in a corporate public public institution youth activist collaboration to figure out paper recycling. And the company was having young people go door to door to educate about recycling. You just have to remember, this is decades ago. I grew up in a really racially diverse community in Northern Virginia, and in my group of people working on this project were a cross section of the school. And my Black friend who went to go get his materials for volunteering was turned away. He was told that he wasn't the kind of person to be representing the recycling effort that we were doing, told by the company. And that, I have to say, when I heard your question, that's the first thing I thought of. I was like, what are you talking about? What kind of person cares about the environment? What kind of person does not? And what is the relationship between the racism here in this Virginia town and our effort to protect the earth? And so that was a moment in which my voice felt very strong and free as a young person. I wrote letters to the editor. I wrote letters to the corporate leadership. I wrote, we mobilized around this and said, this is wrong. What do you mean he's not the right kind of person? And we didn't call it environmental racism at that time. We named it as racism. But I think back to that moment, and then more, maybe seven years later, after college, I was working in the rural Philippines doing environmental legal assistance in the homelands of my father. And this was in the mid-90s, a time in which globally we were beginning to articulate our responsibility and relationship to the earth through the Sustainable Development Goals coming out of Rio. And that the implementation of those goals and priorities in the newly democratic Philippines at that time, post-Marcos 1, was devolved to local government units. And our team of Jesuit lawyers and law students and young people like me living out there in the rural Philippines, we were both working with communities that were protecting water, land, farmland, forest land, fisheries, and teaching sustainable development framework, environmental protection, marine protection, and human rights norms to local government units and to enforcement agencies. So we're working that spectrum. And in that time, we began to articulate the interconnection between human rights and environmental rights. We weren't talking about it that way before, but that was happening concurrently in other parts of Southeast Asia. Earth Rights International was being born in an effort to bring suit against Unical, or Union Oil of California, for their the human rights abuses in the construct of their pipeline there from the Andaman Sea through Burma into Thailand. And we were beginning to see this connection in the concurrent murders of the Ogoni 9 in Nigeria, connected with Shell's oil project there and the contamination over decades. And so that is when I think you used the language of environmental justice, which we know and stand by and defend and celebrate in all corners of our work now. For me, my connection to that as a framework for action have some of these starting points.
Wow. Profound. What a start to a life of impact, and I can't wait to follow this thread now, follow this story, and talk a little bit more about how your journey has continued from the white paper recycling to the Philippines, and then further in. In your book, you wrote a dedication to your children. May you know the heart of the world, your 2 teenage sons. What was your childhood like, and how different was it from your children's?
Well, I grew up in a mixed race household outside of DC on the Virginia side. My mom was a public school teacher. My dad had emigrated from the Philippines as an architect. And my brother and I grew up in a suburb in which we had access to a creek. And the creek was alive. So that's one difference with my children now. My children here in our Northern California Bay Area suburb indeed have access to the trees and the waters because we make sure to create those conditions. A distinction from my childhood is that I was out there in that creek every day. It's where my imagination had space to breathe. The dedication in the book, May You Know the Heart of the World, refers to the words that the Pueblo Ua in Colombia, which we'll talk more about, I'm sure, shortly. It's the words they use to describe their indigenous territory there on the border, on the river border between the country of Colombia and Venezuela. And for them, the heart of the world, is worth protecting. And it is both a physical territory and a set of rivers and mountains, cloud forest, and also a metaphor. And I dedicate the book to my own kids in that particular way, because what has played out in my own life because of geopolitical violence and violence against Earth rights defenders, including our friends, is that I cannot visit the heart of the world of Ua territory. So a future in which my children can is a future that I work diligently alongside many others to create. What does it look like when geopolitical violence has been transformed? What does it look like when we conceive of borders differently than we do now in the flow of people and ideas?
Throughout your book, one of the themes that I discovered was this release of being attached to outcomes. And so the question, what does it look like, is a uniting, it's an uplifting vision that we can all take a step toward together, and we can enjoy the steps in faith of that direction instead of we'll only keep walking if it does happen. Am I rambling there? You say it better than I. So what's the difference between, I guess, hope and faith is what I'm trying to get to.
Well, it's not a ramble, Beth. It is an inquiry. And for me, this inquiry regarding hope and faith has been studied. Like I have sat with it a lot. And ultimately, for me, what I share in the book is my experience of the practices that keep me having faith in where we are going. And actually, it is faith in the practices. It's faith in conducting affairs in a manner in which I can take any given step forward, testing out and checking out and noticing the extent to which I'm in alignment. And that's an alignment of the body. It's an alignment of the use of the joyful reliance on my own skeleton to carry my weight in a way that allows my muscles to do their work and to not take the work of the bones, which means that my muscles can be generally in a state of relaxation, and able to gather strength, which we need to do any of this walking. It's both in the body and it's also in the metaphor of our efforts to get into right relation with the ancestors, the people who came before, in whose efforts we were certainly a glimmer. What is it that allows us to get where we are? It's a whole bunch of steps that people before us took. What is it that allows us to get in right relationship to the communities and the ecosystem, the human and non-human communities around us? What is it that allows us to get into right relationship with the future generations that are yet to come, those standing in front of us? That inquiry is contemplative. It's also super joyful for me because it is a compass. It's both a daily practice to take notice of those relationships and where adjustments are needed, and it's a source of. It is one way in which I experience connection. So that's my introduction to how I would communicate to listeners some of the ways in which I'm thinking about that now. I stayed at a really theoretical level just now when I was speaking, so I'm happy to go any direction you want to go with that.
Well, how I'm feeling is that there are so many of us who go through periods of feeling overwhelmed when we see the size of the struggle in front of us, regardless of what that struggle is. You know, in this particular case, on this particular podcast, we're talking about the environment. And so when you talk about kind of the ability to imagine what would it look like without geopolitical violence, and you ask that question, and then you bring in this idea of being joyful about taking the steps to walk in that direction, as opposed to shutting down.
Okay,
that is a helpful idea for me.
Yeah.
Right?
So, and this is me sharing with you what I've learned from other people. So, an invitation that one of my teachers, Norma Wong, offered a few years ago on this point that I carry with me and is a reason that I can access the joy, is this idea that we would do well to invest the effort and the risk that it takes to go ahead and picture the far horizon. What is it? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What is happening 7 generations from now? And, you know, we can paint that a little bit. I would guess that there are some kernels in common that any human would have. One imagining that has sustained me is teacher Norma Wong's offering herself of the vision of drinkable rivers, of the vision of the rains returning, of gentle rains returning. Everything has to change to get there. You know, everything has to change if my kids are going to have in their lifetimes or their descendants' lifetimes the chance to walk with UA colleagues and comrades inside the heart of the world in Colombia. We can work backwards from even that slim vision, that slim window into the far horizon of drinkable rivers. What is it that we need to be pivoting towards and leaping towards now for us to be headed in that direction? To me, these possibilities help me cut through the noise. and help me increase discernment when considering where to put my precious 24 hours on any given day.
That is so important that you talk about a vision, to use our imagination, and to acknowledge that there are certain kernels that all humans may even imagine together, and how exciting and fun it would be to be thinking about all that we're able to do and all that we know now that we didn't know then. And could we actually do this? And the answer is yes, but how? Right? Yes, but when, and yes, and how much is it going to cost, and who's it going to take? It's going to take us all. But that is an excite for me. That's the kind of, that brings me joy. That there's fun, there's playfulness in that. It's like, wow, we have a challenge. We could do this together. You know?
Yes, and what I'm experimenting with now, also in my own life and in the different organizations and collaboratives that I'm part of, is finding a possibility in the insight that, yes, critical mass is key. At the same time, radical connection with just a few people can help us take these leaps. And so one might feel like, oh, in order to make change, I need to be someone who likes to be out there on the streets every time there's a call to that kind of action. That kind of showing up is absolutely critical and can be made a source of energy as distinct from only the drain that it can sometimes feel when we do that in radical connection with a few folks who are our pod. You know, who are the people who are even just two other people? A triangle is a stable structure. A stool, as we know from working in the field of sustainability, the three-legged stool of sustainability, a stool is a sturdy, stable structure. Who are my two other people with whom I can actually give some space for witnessing each other's grief about what is happening to the planet and to the seemingly intractable divisions and ripping apart of our democracy, or what we thought was our democracy. Giving space for witness to those feelings, but also then turning towards the work of imagining not only what's at stake if it stays like this, but also what do we want it to look like instead? And that's the horizon work that we were just touching into a bit. And then in painting that prayer of the horizon, we need to also be asking ourselves what would need to change to get there? What would it take? What are all the things that could change? And that is the analysis or the questions, we just call them change questions. After my teacher, social change worker, Fran Peavy would call this way of asking each other strategic questions. The change questions have movement built into them. They're not the same as what are we going to do. They're what is it that would need to change for us to be pivoting toward the far horizon. And from there, in a small group of people, it can become more manageable to set oneself up in a relationship of accountability, to identify and just hook onto a few of the actions that could help us get to those changes. And I'm not talking small. It might be at the level of behavior, what any given trio of people working in this way turn to. It could be behavior. It could be at the level of hearts and minds. It could be at the level of systems and structures. We need the wheel of transformation to turn in all of these areas, as you know. And the relevant question that I hold is, where in this wheel of transformation does my offering fit with what would need to change to get to the vision? As we, that's an old and useful lens when trying to find one's place in the work. The key thing that I'm trying to communicate here that is alive for me right now is just how much more like my nervous system can relax when I'm thinking about doing that with the people that I call towards this work with me. And anybody can do that. It's as simple and not easy as opening the kitchen door.
Simple and not easy. It is extraordinary to me that, first of all, it's wonderful that you bring in people like Fran Peavy and Norma Wong and these other mentors, if you will, throughout your life and throughout the book. And it's also, for me, clear that you have come so far based on what I read about your experience, through this horrific time in the story, in your life, where your partner was kidnapped and murdered along with 2 other people. And I want to talk a little bit about the moment of impact in your life, not the death itself, but the moment that you experienced, that you described in your book, of where you understood that the conditions that existed around a company exploiting the land and exploiting the vulnerabilities of people on that land, those conditions were not going to cease. And the pressures around you were not going to relent. And that in that moment, you understood that you were not being asked to go further, go the distance. It was more about going deeper and navigating the world, the open water of grief in a new way. Can you talk a little bit about what happened there and how that changed you?
I had people around me, the period of my life in which you are reflecting right now is when I was in my early 20s. And before the murders, I really thought that we would win because we were good, because we were on the right side of history. I really, I dedicated myself to moving forward pathways for policy and structural change in any forum possible, all the time. And when Terrence and Ingrid and Lahe were killed, that work, as you're describing, that work continued as though the dial had been turned from 5 to 25. And in particular, in that time, the U.S. Congress, together with corporate actors, used the murders as a rallying cry for war, as a rallying cry to support more U.S. military aid to the country of Colombia in their internal armed conflict, aid tied to Colombia's agreement to open up more oil extraction in a place in which the mother lode of that oil was sitting under Pueblo Ua's sacred land, sacred and recognized ancestral territory. And so there was a lot of work that we now, many progressive social movements would call it the work of blocking the bad, and along with the complementary work of building the new, which is what Terry and Ingrid and Lahe had gone in with the UA to do. And on top of that policy and community development and corporate pressure campaign context, murders in a war zone involving an area in which the pipelines are magnets for armed violence produce a ton of work for years to come. There were proceedings at multiple simultaneous levels of various judicial systems for years. And even as I created the conditions for myself in the months and the first couple of years after the murders to leave New York City and to go to the woods here in California behind Monterey Bay, I was living at a yoga training center. I was learning Ashtanga asana practice and the accompanying breath practice, and many other modalities of Ayurvedic medicine to, have a chance of dealing with the grief and have a chance of enabling the shock to my system to move through. There was the trick I had to understand that working at all of these levels needed to be done all at the same time, that it wasn't linear, because I had the impulse. I said to my teacher, Ram Dass, at one point, oh, okay, I get it. There's like all this inner work. It's not even just about the grief. There's a ton of alignment internally that I am aware of now and that I'm eager to cultivate so that I could possibly be an advocate for peace out in the world. That work of making the space for peace inside myself, that could take lifetimes. Why don't I just do that and set aside all of this policy work and accompaniment work? And his really clear answer, even though this was the part of his life in which he had already suffered a stroke and was communicating in large part through gesture and presence, his answer was like, no, it's not about this or that, it's integration, which is not
He went like this, right?
Yeah. From head to heart. Yeah. It's not over here or over there. It's this union. And it took me a long time to understand what he meant, which I describe in the book, my various trial and error efforts to understand what he meant. But the moment to which you refer in your question, the moment that I understood what was being called forth, was probably a nondescript moment in the apartment in Brooklyn that Terry, my beloved, who was murdered, he and I had just moved into this apartment in Brooklyn when he was kidnapped and murdered in Colombia. I realized it was a moment in which I realized I had nothing left. Like I had no reserves to call on. I had no coherent spiritual framework for myself that involved any kind of practice that I could get connected to and lean on. I didn't have a conscious circle of community around me. There were people around me. There were people of deep and committed connection around me. We didn't call upon each other in the depth work as we would understand it today at that time. And I also realized during that time while I was still in Brooklyn that without those structures of support and without my feet on the ground, like my feet on the earth itself, that I risked replicating the patterns of violence or unskillfulness that we were working diligently to prevent at the macro level. I risked the replication at the very, very micro. So as is typical in instances of human rights crimes in which there are multiple victims, focusing in on who is to blame really and what are the systems and structures and relationships of power over where accountability should sit. That is hard. It's hard to turn one's focus fully there when there's been such personal violence. And what was happening in the micro was that there was a bunch of work to address within the organizations who were earnestly all trying to their best to get at the structural changes that were needed. There was all the normal human interpersonal cleaning up that also needed done at the very same time. And to not get stuck there required a level of discipline, discernment, self-awareness that I was starting to get the sense would become more possible if I would sit my butt down for a sitting practice or a walking meditation practice or the intimacy of sharing at the level of self-development with a community or sangha of people. I think that's what started to change for me. And then it just took me many years to figure out the balance.
You talk a little bit about the importance of practice, in your answer there, and not having a practice at the beginning, or not having a set of practices that you needed to adequately support you or sustain you through the changes and the inner work that you needed to do inside of all of this, all the dynamics around you. I have learned so much from you about the practices that you did acquire, that you did learn, that you did put in place and repeat on a consistent basis in order to have them really inhabit the way that you think about things, the way that you approach your life, the way that you feel your own body. Mm-hmm. And in one of the, I have a couple of different examples here, but one I'd like to ask you a little bit about, because I think lots of people can relate to it, which is the idea of staying. Mm-hmm. So in the book, you talk a little bit about, and I'll just kind of paraphrase this, the frenzy of the activist that actually neutralizes the work for peace versus learning how to stay and doing the staying, which helps you remember why you stay. Now those words may feel a little foreign to the everyday person, but you go on to say that staying allows the contradictory pulls on your heart, on your energy to resolve themselves. And to be awake in this time is to hold both the heartbreak and the beauty. So cultivating the capacity to hold all of it, the heartbreak of maybe what you're seeing, the destruction around you, and yet still hold on to the beauty and the love and the joy that's in the world that you see, requires us both to make supple and to strengthen our container. And our container, as I understand it from the book, is not just our body as a physical container, but as a community. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about the power of staying, and what is staying to you? What does that mean to you? How did that help you?
I'm really honored that you read the book, Beth, in this, with this attentiveness that your question here represents. For me, this question of staying when staying is needed, as children's author Mem Fox would say, came into focus for me because at a very practical level, as I have now learned is common for people in grief or who have had a traumatic experience that entails, in the end, a bunch of grief. At a very practical level, my experience from the moment we found the bodies, the kidnapping was 8 days. We found the bodies on the 8th day. From the moment we found the bodies, my heart departed. My heart left in flight, circumnavigating the contours of the earth in search. Where are you? Because it was not safe. My experience that I can reflect on now is that for many years it did not feel safe for my heart to rest steadily with any kind of sense of security back home in the inner temple of my own awareness, back here in my rib cage. My experience rather was that the earth below just looked like an open chasm. I was not confident at all that if I were to step fully forward on the mantle of the earth, that it would rise up to meet me. It really was my experience. I was pretty sure I would drown. And so a lot of my gestures and movements in the world reflected this flight. And we see that in social movements today. The words from Thomas Merton that you were paraphrasing about the frenzied work of the activist working for peace, neutralizing the possibility of peace. This paradox is present in many spiritual traditions as something worth looking at. And so over time, I figured out ways to remember, to bring back those parts of myself. And for me, it was very, very practical experience of once I became friends with the present moment, for so long, the horrificness of those 10 bullets, the horrificness of what had happened to the body of my dear one, the horrificness of the things that had already happened would crowd in on me, and the terror of the future that I was not clear at all would also crowd in on me. And once I figured out that the space between those things, the space between the past and the future, is the present, and actually that's the only thing actually happening right now. There are no bullets right in this moment. My breath is going in and coming out in this moment. I am not having to figure out what my life is going to be in the aftermath of these murders in this moment. Fortunately, my access to that reprieve felt merciful and welcome and wholly mine. And I could hang out there. And some people would call that shock, but I knew that there was something more universal, something more enduring about that space. And I wanted to figure out how to stay in it, and what could become available in my approaches to my daily life, to the people in my world and to our work, if we are figuring out the mechanisms of staying. So staying has been this practice that feels to me related to rest. And, rest is this state of being in which we cease activity so that we can recover strength, so that we can relax and recover strength. Anybody who's gone through a horrific loss or other trauma knows that the impulse to just keep moving and to at all costs not stay put knows both the consequence of that continual movement and the fruit that is like achingly just out of reach, as though around the corner, as though just out of view, the fruit of letting oneself come back into the body in a way that lets some of that integration happen. And so the practices that I learned basically came down to gratitude. Like, if we slow down enough to really peel an orange, like if we take an orange in our hands and we time our in-breath and our out-breath to very slowed down movements to get the peel off of the orange, and in so doing contemplate the journey of that orange to our hand, there is no way to get to the point of placing a slice of that orange in one's mouth in which we're not simultaneously flooded with gratitude. Because how many steps, how many hands, how many resources, how many elements, the fundamental elements of life, how many policies, how many sacrifices, how many waterways, how many nutrients making their way into that fruit, in order for that fruit to do its work in my body, let alone the exquisiteness of the taste, let alone the heartbreak of what's happening to our pollinators. Like all of that is in the bite of the fruit. When we slow down enough to be in touch with that cycle, then gratitude is the lens. And that, for me, that's where joy is possible. And the working in concert with others from that fundamental gift becomes more creative and more able to be focused in on the pivots and leaps that can lead to transformation. Because ultimately what we're talking about is going ahead and stepping into our awareness of our interdependence with the rest of all life, even the people pulling the triggers. Like that we all, maybe, can I say we all? My sense is that when conditions are present, many people do have access to an understanding of interdependence with the rest of life, human and non-human, animals, plants, minerals, humans. And we have been living, in a cultural narrative that manifests in social and economic systems of separation. It's the lie of separation. It's the lie of supremacy. And we're at the end of that story. We happen to be alive at the end of that story. So our own awareness of our interdependence and our fierce allegiance to it, you can see it comes out in contemporary social movements all over the place. We have out on the street, we have people joyfully holding the signs that read, "I am the earth protecting itself." And that's just a glimmer. That's just one manifestation, but it's happening in policy settings. It's happening in state houses in which even elected officials at various levels of government are standing up and speaking from their own experience of interdependence and just cutting through in order to help birth the cultural moment that we're actually in.
You know, what I love about the book is that you share generously these various practices and also who taught you, or who shared these ideas or concepts, visualizations with you, so that we really have a layered set of tools that we can use over and over again. So first of all, I'm going to go peel an orange real slow later today. I think we should all peel an orange, y'all. I think we should all do that. That's a takeaway. But you have turned your pain and your growth into real purpose. You are purposeful throughout your entire career, your life, through your work in law and community resilience, and now this book. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing now. What does it look like to lead from the front lines? I know you're working on some projects with the People's Climate Innovation Center and also UC Irvine's partnership with the ERC in Santa Ana. I'd love to hear about what you're doing now.
Oh, thank you for asking. It is my sustenance, indeed. I support resident leaders, community leaders from frontline communities in the various ways that my various positions of privilege enable me to do that work alongside, as a distinction that feels important to me to make for the listener regarding my own awareness of my own positionality, which is that I am not in a frontline community here in the United States, where frontline communities are bearing the brunt of our environmental and climate catastrophes.
True.
Similar to the places and peoples alongside whom I have walked in other parts of the world. Before pivoting to the United States, I will say as a punctuation that in this work with the Colombian UA community that was fighting in this oil company for so long, and also asserting their human and indigenous right to self-determination over many policies that were adversely affecting their ability to maintain cultural life and connection to their lands and waters. In that work, even in a couple of years before the 1999 murders, they were asserting those rights in any legal forum possible, including the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. What I want listeners to know is that even after the most horrific things happened, the murders in 1999, for the UA, of course, this is in the context of centuries worth of colonial invasion of their places and peoples. The 1999 murders ushered in a period of intensified physical violence against the community as they were taking a stand against the oil company there. And all of the claims related to that violence and to the larger structural issues that they were asserting, just in the last couple of months, were decided by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in favor of the community, for the first time holding the country of Colombia accountable for their violation of the rights of indigenous peoples in a manner that strengthens the rights of indigenous peoples across Latin America. So that is like it's a mini long arc. It's a 30-year arc that was very difficult to see how it would conclude over those decades, but it is a place that we arrive now. And in the hearing at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in Santiago, which was a couple of years ago, even though the decision came down a few months ago. 2 years prior to that is when we went to Santiago to hear the case. At that hearing, which is, some of the rare in-person time that I get with my colleagues from Pueblo Ua, we were talking about the work that's happening here in California and in many low-income communities of color throughout the United States, much of which is immigrant-led, from people from other parts of Latin America who have left because of environmental devastation and violence, found their way here to the United States and are mobilized and organized in ways that are very familiar to the UA community. My UA colleagues took in the stories of the work happening here and noted, oh, it's the same work. You're doing this, it's the same work that's happening in UA territory as in the communities here, including the community, the Mexican majority community in Santa Ana, California, to which I'm accountable, in which communities that have long understood their disinvestment have long understood that the dominant systems were never set up to work for the thriving of their communities anyway, have created conditions for community ownership of economic justice, of climate resilience, in manners that look like a strong ecosystem of worker-owned cooperatives, a strong ecosystem of community land trusts, of urban farms on marginal lands all over the cities, strong infrastructure for mutual aid and for health equity, as defined and called for by resident leaders throughout their communities. And that kind of work there in the city of Santa Ana, where I get to work with many of the people advancing these strategies, which we also, can call the strategies to build the new. That work is coming together around a community engagement process to design a community climate resilience center so that there is a hub that is community owned in preparation for and during recovery from climate disaster. And this is one of 11 that are being planned throughout low-income communities and communities of color in our state, as sponsored by the governor, in a network of such community resilient centers that are emerging all over the United States. And so that work is the most alive to me right now, indeed. Because it's so grounded in community ownership and using the methods that are often coming from countries of origin, including popular education and the asamblea process that we see, in celebrated examples like the Zapatistas. Like, if we're looking for where does democracy live besides the broken ballot box, it's these processes that communities everywhere are taking in order to twin economic justice with climate resilience.
So you have led an extraordinary life. You are doing extraordinary work. Most of us are ordinary people who are trying to find our way to make an impact. Specifically, the listeners of this podcast, an impact related to environmental justice. A question you probably get all the time. Where can someone start who might not be an expert in climate justice or community resilience even?
Well, I would say let's start with understanding that we are made for these times, as my friend Kyra Jewell would say. We were made for these times. And so I would encourage people to read this book, truth demands. It's one place, as you've been describing, it's one place where just through the stories, there might be something to glean about starting places.
For sure.
And then to do what I was reflecting on earlier, the thing that I'm practicing right now is find my people. Like I'm not saying we only need to work in threes. No. But it is a very accessible starting place. In the field of climate disaster recovery or preparedness even, people often say, your climate disaster preparedness begins by baking muffins. Bake a set of 12 muffins. Bring them to your neighbor. Knock on the door. Sit on the front porch. Break bread. Understand each other and each other's stories. And arrive at the hard questions. How do we get down this hill when the fire comes? Who's going to need the most in our neighborhood? Who do we need to make sure is on speed dial? Who's not going to be answering their door? Those are, that's a evocative way of saying find your people, but it could also be just as, even more accessible of letting your girlfriend's conversation turn to what's actually going on. What it is actually like to be living in this moment in which the institutions and the forests and the seas that we might have taken for granted are being threatened and at a survival level.
And navigate those conversations, as you say in the book, with acknowledging that, yes, there are catastrophes all around us, and yet we're going to keep going.
We're going to keep going because, there's nothing to lose but our chains. and
all right,
because we are pivoting to the far horizon, which we know is worth it. What else are we going to do this lifetime, if not that?
Well, let's talk about what else we're going to do in this lifetime. We're going to experience some joy. So how are you integrating joy and rest in your days today, Abby?
Well, for me, writing a book is a funny thing because I already have, my family members quoting me to myself.
Okay.
About rest. And that's not me here like glorifying my lack of rest. I'm not into that, but it still remains a puzzle for me. But one thing that has happened, Beth, is that I thought writing was what I was doing. I didn't really realize that I would also need to be speaking. And something that happened to me after the murders was the tightening and closing of my voice. Because the ultimate lesson from the murders, of course, was you speak up, you get killed. And so writing the book is what I thought was going to open my voice. Turns out when you write a book, you also speak. And that practice is not familiar or easy for me. And so what I know I need to be able to sit in conversation with you and with others is what we're calling right now rainbows of spaciousness. And it's like the actual building into my calendar of the food and exercise and sleep, the turning to, which is this other way of staying. It's like the staying that's not checking out, but the staying that actually nourishes us for the road ahead. So I'm practicing just like anybody else. And fortunately, I'm not in early childhood parenting anymore. My kids are grown and almost flown, and they have an embodied understanding of rest for themselves that they model for me.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's a great point where we can end this conversation. Abby, thank you so much for reminding us that environmental justice is not separate from us. It is a part of us. We are the part of the earth. We are part of the community. And for sharing your story in your book, but also spending time with us, bringing some of those ideas to life in new ways, like peeling the orange very slowly, which I will be doing. I can't wait for everyone to read your new book. I know that they will enjoy it as much as I did and will hold on to it as a reference, as a tool, as we all go through extraordinary times of change. And for folks listening, keep an eye out for Abby's upcoming book. It is thoughtful and fierce and the kind of leadership we need right now. It is empathetic and clear and truthful and balanced and instructive, I will say. We're so grateful for your voice. I'm so glad that you've expanded it. Abby, you're such a gift. The clarity, your humility, you're charting paths forward, and we are following right behind you. And to the Planeteers Podcast listeners, thank you for tuning in. If this conversation moved you, share it, because these are the voices like Abby who are shaping what's possible, and they deserve to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Planeteers Podcast. If it meant something to you, send it to someone who'd care, or leave a review to help others find us. You can find us on Insta, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky, or at planeteerspodcast.com. Join us next time with more women creating a cooler world.